don't want what we know out there.
How a person can go from really almost nothing to becoming a millionaire by owning rental properties.
He would always buy these flip houses, and I just remember thinking, this guy is crazy. Why would he buy that house?
In the past decade, there's been a huge surge in the peer-to-peer short-term rental market.
Become an insider. So you have to know the rules before you get the game.
Every second counts. So make every second count.
Welcome to the Real Estate Jam. Whether you're just beginning or the best of the best, we're glad you're here. We will share successes, failures, and strategies for the action-taking real estate investor. And now to your hosts, JD, Annabelle, and Melissa.
Hi guys, welcome to the Real Estate Jam podcast. I'm JD with my wonderful co-host, Melissa.
Hello.
And today we brought a titan of real estate out for you guys. This is Troy Fullwood, and he is, look at that. He is the president and founder of Pinnacle Investments, and he's also the author of an outstanding book called The Power of Paper, which I'm sure we'll get into later. Troy, thank you so much for coming on our show today and taking some time to speak with us and our audience.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. I'm looking forward to our conversation and helping as many people as we can out there to understand, the power of paper and really how useful it is in the world of real estate. And it's one of those things that oftentimes gets overlooked in real estate deals. And, being in the space for the last, it'll be 26 years this May, and done over 16,000 plus transactions in the world of single family residential first lien mortgages. We've done that on a nationwide basis, and we've even gotten into the non-performing first lien note space back in 2006. Started the first distressed asset fund on Wall Street, built a model that was eventually sold off to the banking institutions and helped them in their loan modification model. What's that old saying? When the student's ready to learn, the teacher will appear. Well, the teacher appeared, but the student wasn't really ready to learn in the banking world. So they didn't do it as well as they could have. But at the end of the day, we helped save a lot of homes from foreclosure, and that's really the beauty of the note space is that as an owner of them, you can do a lot of amazing things to help people out and yet still maintain cash flow and returns and all those other kind of fun things. So,
well, we met you a couple of years ago at a mastermind. And when you spoke, that was just like, I've never even heard of that. It was like mind blowing. So if you could start there with people who don't even know that kind of thing.
Well, what is a note? What is a note?
Yeah. So the way I like to explain a note is really simple. It's a glorified IOU. When we were in elementary school and stuff, and you get a candy bar from a buddy of yours, and like, okay, I owe you 50 cents, I'll bring it tomorrow type thing. It's a glorified IOU. And notes have been around since the inception of our country. If you look at the movie, It's a Wonderful Life, that whole movie is around banking and lending and notes. And yet it's an amazing story at Christmas time that people love to watch. But the point being is that back in the days when our country was founded, what they would do is farmers would sell land to another farmer or to another person, and they would literally create an IOU, AKA a note. And really what a note is, it's a unrecorded document that ultimately outlines whatever the agreement is between those two people. Now, in a real estate deal, it's, typically the sales price, the down payment, the interest rate, how many payments are going to be made. If there's a late fee, how much is the late fee? That they're responsible for taxes and things of that nature. And they're not typically more than about maybe 2, sometimes 3 pages long, and they're not recorded. They are notarized. Some are not even notarized, by the way. But you can do a legal binding note even on a piece of just plain paper. Like the three of us could sit down and write one out and both sign it, or all three of us sign it, and it would be it would be a legal binding deal. Now, that's the private sector. And I'm going to talk about two sides of the lending world. There's the institutional side of the lending world, which is the B of A's, the Wells Fargos, the JP Morgan Chases, and things of that nature. And those are big institutions, typically the ones you see, in the middle of the news and the media. And then you've got the other side of the lending world, which is the private lending world. So you've got best way to describe it is people will, owner financing for seller carryback. Those are typically trigger words or words that describe the private lending sector. Now, I'm not talking about private lending as in hard money lending. I'm talking about trading a piece of property for a note. And that side of the industry is a $1.6 to $1.8 trillion industry. The institutional side is a $10 to $11 trillion industry. So you can see it's a big number. I mean, it's a big number. And oftentimes it doesn't get talked about because it's really, it's not headline news. It's not headline news. You may see a house when you're driving through your community and for sale by owner will carry, and you don't really think much about it. Oh, it's a house for sale. You may not have even paid attention to those signs until after this podcast. But the point being is that with the two different sides of the industry, you've got the institutional side that has to follow strict regulation. So you've got you're dealing with RESPA law, you're dealing with Section 32, you're dealing with predatory lending, and all of these other aspects. And a lot of that has to do with where the money's coming from. It's coming from VA, is it coming from FHA, is it conventional, is it a jumbo loan? What kind of loan is it? And that dictates what people can do. And on the private side, we get to make up our own rules. We get to make up our own rules. Now, are there some guidelines that I would call best practices? Absolutely. You don't want to do deals that ultimately are in violation of usury law or anything of that nature. If where you're operating at has usury law, we don't have that here in Arizona, but other parts of the country do. You also want to make sure that people are putting money down when they buy a house or a property. Now, you can use notes on houses. You can use them on apartment complexes. You can use them on land. You can use them on townhouses, condos, co-ops, commercial properties of literally any kind. So the gamut is big. But that's essentially what a note is. Now, in order to do a real estate transaction with any note, whether it's institutional or private, there's 3 documents that are included. You've got the note, which outlines the payment agreement. You've got the deed of trust or mortgage, depending upon what state you're in, which is the recorded document. That's also a notarized document that gets recorded at the county level, wherever the property resides. And that outlines the amount owed, but not so much the detailed terms like the interest rate, the payment amount, or late fees or anything like that. But it does outline the various responsibilities of both the homeowner and the lender, which is what you are when you carry back a note. And then you've got your warranty deed or your deed. So the deed is actually what conveys the property. So if I was buying a house from JD and Melissa, then they would deed the house over to me, and that would be in my name, along with the lien of the mortgage and then the debt terms on the note. So that's a long answer to a short question, JD, but I just wanted to give an in-depth analysis of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is a lot of information, but when we're talking about our investors, there's a couple of different ways that our guys can use this, right? That is acquiring a property some way and then selling it on some sort of owner finance term.
Yes.
And or just buying the note. You can trade notes just like you trade properties and doing it that way. Or you could, if you needed quick cash, you could sell your owner finance note to another note investor. Can we talk a little bit about what that stuff looks like?
Yeah. So there, as you mentioned, there's two basic ways that you can use notes in your business. Number one, if you go out and you buy a house, you fix it up, you work your magic, and then you want to sell it, but you want to retain some cash flow from it, you can owner finance it using a note, mortgage, and deed. Now, that's what they often call a wrap mortgage. It's noted as a wrap, especially if there's underlying debt on the house that you bought, whether that's private money, hard money, institutional money, HELOC line of credit, friends and family money, whatever it is, however you got the house, you got the house. Now, if it's your money, it's your money. So that would be called a wrap, and you would make the margin on that. Just like if you bought a house, you rented a house, the bank X dollars that you rent. Then you've got the side of the business, which is just notes in general. And that's what we've been doing for 25 and a half years, is buying and selling real estate notes in the institutional space as well as the private sector space. So what that's all about is we'll go in there and let's say it's a $100,000 note, and it was maybe $110,000 sales price on the house. They got $10,000 down at 30-year terms at a 7% interest rate. And it's a single family owner occupied property. They'll bring that to us and they'll say, okay, Troy, we sold this house and now we want to sell the note because we prefer to have a lump sum of cash versus the cash flow. Now, some people agree with that and some people don't, but at the end of the day, it all depends on where you're at in your investing model and your investing career. So if you're in the beginning stages, you're turning these deals quite a bit because you're creating your momentum. If you're in kind of the later stages of investing where you're slowing down, then oftentimes people are holding on to those notes because they do have cash flow. And there is an arbitrage aspect to them where they're collecting $1,000 a month and the underlying lien on the property is say $500 a month. So now they're getting a $500 a month net cash flow because they're no longer responsible for the upkeep, the insurance, or anything else on the property. So buying and selling notes is its own model in the sense that we'll come in, we'll price out that $100,000 note based on a yield, that typically ranges anywhere between 8% and 12%. Okay, on the property. And what dictates the yield on notes? Pretty simple. Creditworthiness of the borrower. How good is the deal? Now, one thing I didn't mention when you're talking about putting the deal together, you're talking about down payment, you're talking about interest rate, and that example was 7. Then you've got terms of 10, 20, 30 years. Most people do 30 because it's longer and cheaper payment than that. But then there's another key ingredient. That's 40% of the overall scoring model, and that is the borrower's credit. Okay, the borrower's credit. Now, the biggest mistake that people make when they're creating notes is they'll buy the house, they'll put all their heart and soul into it, fixing it up, doing all those things, dotting all their I's, crossing all their T's with their contractors and everybody else, and then they find a buyer who's got a 500 credit score. And they do the deal with that buyer because that buyer's got $10,000 cash down to put down. And rather than upping their marketing game and staying on the market a little bit longer and finding another buyer for that property, they'll scoop that one up. Then they'll do the note deal. They'll close it at a title company attorney's office. And then ultimately they'll hand the keys over to a 6-figure asset to a buyer who couldn't even get a T-Mobile cell phone if they had to without prepayment on it. So and this is what oftentimes happens. Now, I'll tell you exactly why it happened. They hate banks. There's a common thread between investors. They hate banks. And they hate banks because they don't understand how banks work. And so they get irritated with the bank, like, well, the heck with that bank. I'm going to do different than the bank did. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to change and I'm going to create my own matrix and I'm going to do it my way. Well, I'm not a big fan of banks either, to be frankly honest with you. Matter of fact, I went to a bank yesterday to cash a check the guy gave me. And I went to his bank, Wells Fargo, and I don't have an account there. And I do the drive-through and they're like, we got to charge you $7.50 to give you your money. I'm like, this is his check off of your bank. And they're like, yeah, we want $7.50 to cash this. I'm like, no. I'll just go to my bank, which happened to be a half mile more down the road. I was being lazy is what I was being. And so I went around the corner and I got my money and I went on down the road. But so I don't really have a fondness for banks. I'm not sending Christmas cards to them. Let's just say that. So I get that. But as much as we hate what they do, they're a great teacher about what to do well. Meaning there are certain things they do really well, and there are certain things that they don't do very well at. And I couldn't agree with, people's frustration, any more than I do. But to copy what they do well, and they underwrite deals to make sure that people are going to pay them back. And you want to make sure that that happens when you're creating notes, because if you don't, you can create a deal and you'll get a first or second or third payment default in the deal. And that homeowner will sit in that property for 6 to 12 months. If it's in New York, it's like 4 years. If it's in Illinois, it's like 2 years. Florida was, past a year, but I think it's way down. I think it's like 8 months or 9 months or something like that. But even if it's 8 or 9 months, that's 8 or 9 months without cash flow.
Well, that's only without the coronavirus. I don't know. Who knows how long it would be nowadays?
Very good point. Very good point. Absolutely.
So what I was gathering from that is you can create your note. You can spend all this time to fix up a house and pour your heart and soul into it. And you can mess it up by putting somebody in there on owner finance terms that's not credit worthy. And really what that means is while you hold the note, you're exposing yourself to that risk that maybe they pay or maybe they don't. But also what we're really speaking about is when you go to flip that note to another investor, because now it's time for you to get that cash, you're going to receive less of your lump sum will be smaller because the risk that the investor is having to take on purchasing that note is greater because you didn't do your due diligence to find a good tenant or a tenant buyer in the initial stages. And you really can't go back and fix that unless they default and you get them out of there and then put somebody else back in. So once you made that mistake, it could be years before you can fix it, if ever.
I mean, it's a mistake that leaves a scar. There's no doubt about it. And it leaves a scar both in your time and your money and your frustration, your mental state of mind. And I can't tell you that I've been preaching this sermon for 20 years. Because we do a lot of simultaneous closings in our office. And so we're constantly underwriting deals. And I'll even see people will come at me and they say, well, Dodd-Frank, and I said to do this, and we used an RMLO, and the RMLO underwrote the loan for us. And so it's a perfect loan. But then you look at it and the RMLO wrote the loan. It was great. It was fine. But when they pulled credit, the credit was like a 460 on the loan. And the investor ignored that. They said, well, the RMLO did it. Well, the RMLO doesn't do anything more than prepare the paperwork. That's it. They just enter the data. The system spits it out, says you're within the guidelines here. That's it. It doesn't tell you whether you should or shouldn't do the deal. So that's the responsibility of the investor to make sure that they are looking at those things at even a deeper level, because the RMLO doesn't have any fiduciary responsibility to tell it yes or no. It's kind of like hiring a paralegal to write your documents. They put in there what you tell them to put in there, then they hand them to you, and you're responsible for making sure that things are in there or not. And I've had that conversation with people over and over and over again. And it's a hard conversation to have. And personally, it sucks because you see people put their blood, sweat, and tears into finding a house, fixing up the house, working their weekends and nights on the house and with subcontractors and everything else. And then they hand the keys off to somebody who hasn't paid anybody in the last 2 years because they didn't even do the right stuff. And I harp on that time and time again, because what we see on our side when we get files in here, what we see on our side from private sector is that they don't pull credit on the borrowers. And they don't typically do it because they don't know how, or they don't have a service, or they don't have a friend who could help them pull it. Or even if you don't have a service or any of those things, have the borrower go and pull a credit karma. They're free. They're free. You'll get 2 out of the 3 bureaus and have it scored, and then have the borrower bring it back to them, and then they can look at it and see that it's a legitimate deal. I highly recommend, I personally highly recommend that you don't do deals with people that have a 620 or less credit score, maybe a 575 down to that. But you start going below that, you're dealing, as it is, anybody below 620, like 619, 620 and below, is in the bottom 20%. Is in the bottom 20% of borrowers in our country.
Wow.
In our country. So if you're fishing in that pond, no matter how beautiful that house is that you just worked day and night to create, that house has now become tainted because the number one ingredient in that deal is the borrower's ability to pay. And if they haven't been paying everybody else, or they haven't been paying other people, then eventually they're going to stop paying you. Now, I'm not saying bad things don't happen to good people. I've seen that happen to my friends. I've seen bad things happen to my family members. I get that, and that does happen. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to catch somebody when they're at the bottom of the valley. If they're working their way up and they fell, they made a mistake. We all make mistakes. I've yet to meet anybody that walks on water. And when we do, that's going to be a whole nother conversation someday. But my point being is we all make mistakes. So you want to catch them on the way up. A year and a half ago, blah, 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 and my credit went in the tank, and I've been doing this for the last year and a half, and here's where I started, here's where I'm at. Okay, good. So it's something to pay attention to. I love the note space. I think it's the best investing model in the world, but it has risk associated with it, just like cryptocurrency does and the stock market does and anything else out there. It does have risk. And so I always want to help people to understand the risk and then to mitigate the risk. Make good choices. Make good choices. My job's not. I'm not trying to save the world. I'm just trying to help people understand and get better at what they're doing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Troy, if we're looking at purchasing a note from an investor, is there a way that we should run that? Do we need to evaluate it a certain way? We look at the persons, but how should I know what's that discount worth, or what's that lump sum worth, and how do I make it, or how do I know that it's a good deal for me? If I'm not interested in the asset, I'm interested in the cash flow. How do I know how much of or how to buy at a discount, I guess, is really the question there.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So typically in the seller finance space, and when you're buying a note, they're typically ranging anywhere from about, our minimum is 50,000, up to 250,000. That's kind of our sweet spot as a whole. When you go, you don't see a lot of deals that are over 250. If you do, it's kind of an odd deal, maybe on a very unique property or a property with a lot of land or something like that. I'm not saying we don't buy larger deals, but they don't typically come bouncing across our desk. You also tend to see people that are able to afford those higher price point properties. They can go down to Wells Fargo and they'll jump through the hoops and get their 2% money and be happy. So my point being is that when I'm looking at a deal, I'm looking at the terms, I'm looking at the down payment. I want to make sure they got skin in the game. I want them to think twice in the event that they're going to walk away from it. Okay. I'll go political here, in our cancel culture mindset that we've developed as a country, the idea is, okay, I don't need that anymore. So, or they didn't treat me the way I wanted to. So I'm going to just, I'm going to cancel that out. I'm not going to do that. If you think about it, you kind of go back to 2007, 2008, 2009, when the market crashed. We have a whole new generation of people, and even the older generation that was in the middle of it, that have learned, that now have a new learned behavior. Okay, a new learned behavior. So, AKA foreclosures. And so that's not as bad. If you go back to the 1930s, getting a divorce, bankruptcies, foreclosures, those were all taboo. Now, 2021, it's like, okay, no big deal. I don't like you, you don't like me, let's get a divorce. That becomes our culture, which is really sad, but we migrated into this. So when I'm underwriting a deal, I'm looking for things. I want to make sure they got skin in the game. I want to make sure their credit is solid, or at least good. It doesn't need to be 850 credit, but it can't be 450 credit either. It's got to be, I personally like 575 and better. I also don't like doing deals that are below 50,000. Okay, not saying they're bad deals, but below 50,000, when you start putting discounts in there and things of that nature, even if it's a 10 or 15 or 20% discount, whatever it might be a 30% discount. That's a big number off of a small number. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not out there, and I'm not saying we never do them, but at the end of the day, it tends to hit the numbers pretty big. So in that, when we're looking at deals, we're just doing the math on it. We're looking at it right out of the gate. It's about a 30-second process where we figure out what our yield is after we know what the borrower's credit is on the deal. Now, we can pull credit in-house, and so we'll do that. As long as we have access or have a social security number to do that, we can pull credit on a borrower because they allow us to under the Fair Credit Collection Act of 1970. Section 601C3, I think is what it is, but that's a story for another day. But point being is that if we have a copy of the note, we can pull a person's credit. And yes, it is hard pull. And then we go in there and we price it out based on risk at the end of the day.
Okay. I think that's really good, Troy, and there's a ton of information that we've gone over. If we were going to tell somebody, hey, this is the book you need, where would we send them?
Yeah, so I would encourage everybody to stop by Amazon, go to Amazon.com and type in Power of Paper by Troy Fullwood, and you'll see the book there. You can grab a copy of it. It's kind of what it looks like. Bam. Awesome. And what's cool about this, and what we did with this book is, well, number one, you can go there and get the book. Then the $20, it's thousands of dollars worth of free education. But in there is a free training of like 50 videos that I've created that kind of walk through the wholesaling side of the business, what JD was asking about. Great question, by the way, JD. It's just hard to explain.
Yeah, absolutely.
in the amount of time we have here. But yeah, you can get a whole training, and I've got a private VIP training that if you go there, read the book, and then leave a great review and just screenshot the review and email it to our office at support@pinnacle-investments.com, we'll send you a whole nother free training on how you can buy notes that are debt-free and don't cost you any money. So that's one of our favorite things to do is buy notes and not have any debt on it because it just increases our cash flow.
Right.
At the end of the day. So show people how to do that as well. So it's pretty cool stuff.
That is cool.
Yeah. I wish I could pull up our software and our screen and all that other stuff and show people how the math on it works, but it's in the training.
No, absolutely. It is an amazing, it's like almost, I would almost say it's like next level investing, right? Because you have your wholesaling, then you have your buy and hold, and your development and all this stuff. And this is just one more tool to add to your toolbox. It's not the right tool for every situation. but it is definitely one that I think everyone should at least have a basic level knowledge, because there's so many applications. If you find somebody who needs a lump sum, but you can help guide them to somebody who buys notes, and there's a whole bunch of different applications once you're smart enough on the basic understanding. And I think that's what's really great about your book. I wouldn't call your book basic, but it definitely get somebody started in the right direction on understanding these whole, in which were completely foreign to me and Melissa before we started doing it. But
it's, if you think about what is the 1% of our population do, they lend money. They own debt. They don't have debt. They own debt. And so if you look at the banking model, as much as we might hate it, they always have the tallest buildings in every city that we go to. And there's a reason for that. And so you look at their model, and you're like, okay, they lend money, and they don't even lend their money, to be frankly honest with you. They lend other people's money, and they make huge amounts of money in return. And that same thing can be done on a grassroots level or street level investor model for people to create a legacy for their family and their future generations, and start teaching them financial intelligence about what and how to do things. I mean, I've been in it for almost 26 years, but there's times I wish I was in it for 35 years because I wish I would have gotten started sooner.
Right, absolutely.
All right.
So I love sharing with people that how to help them change their thought process. Because fixing and flipping houses, it's a tough business. There's no doubt about it. But if you could keep like 2 out of every 5 deals that you did, and they were debt free, and you just had a note on it that you sold the property to a happy home buyer, then now you're starting to build that legacy wealth for you and your family. And if the market changes or shifts, and it will, you've got cash flow coming in that, covers your expenses or overhead, every month. And I know guys that have done that time and time again. It's one of the things we love to share with investors.
Absolutely. Well, Troy, we do want to be respectful of your time. We really appreciate the conversation. And we'll definitely link to all of the book and your website and everything in the show notes.
Great. It's been a pleasure being here. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to see you guys again. It seems like it's been like forever since we were last together, but this whole COVID thing is
I know.
on our travel plans too much. But it's great to see you guys again.
You need a beach vacation, Troy. Come and see us down in Panama City.
Yeah, sooner versus later. That's for sure.
That's right. All right. Thank you, Troy.
Take care, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Jam. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, check out our website, therealestatejam.com, or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Real Estate Jam. If you have any questions, feel free to drop us an email at therealestatejam@gmail.com. See you next episode.